In Proverbs 23, verses 1 through 16, the overall counsel is that wisdom reads motives, not just mouths. Sometimes people say things with their mouths that hide their true motives. They say one thing, but they mean something else. And wisdom gives us the discernment to look past the surface of a person's words and into their hearts. So in verses 1 through 3, when a ruler invites you to dinner, it may sound with his words like he's doing this out of the kindness of his heart, and he wants you to join him for dinner to express his appreciation for you. But in verse 3, he says it is deceptive food, because usually when a ruler invites you over for dinner, it's because he wants something from you. He's going to pretend like he's doing all of this just as a favor to you, but in reality, he wants favors from you. So put a knife to your throat, which I think is just an expression for showing self-control, almost like how we say bite your tongue. It's an extreme picture of abstinence from food here, because if you get sucked into all of the delicacies and the amazing buffet that he spreads out before you, it can lower your guard and get you to promise things that you should not promise, or to agree to do some favor that actually is not beneficial for you, simply because you were distracted by this sumptuous feast. In verses 4 and 5, sometimes we need the wisdom to discern our own motives, because with our mouths, we can tell people, I'm not really in it for the money. Money is no big deal to me. But in our hearts, we may be chasing after wealth, setting our eyes on it as if it's the only thing that truly matters. But he says it's so foolish to do that, because money makes itself wings and flies away like an eagle into the skies. Now in verses 6 through 8, here's a scenario where a person tells you that they want you to come over for a meal, but they don't actually want you there at all. And you may wonder, why would he invite us to eat if he doesn't want us there? Well, it could be that he's bound by social convention, and because you had him over for a meal, he feels obligated to show reciprocity even though he doesn't want to. Or maybe his wife invited you for dinner without asking him. In verse 7, it's not what we say with our mouths that declares the truth about us, but what we're thinking in our minds and in our hearts. And this guy may say with his mouth, sure, come on over, I'll make dinner for you. But while you're eating, he's glaring at you and judging you for eating so much of his food. And he thinks you're a burden and an imposition on him, which means anything that you say to him to gain his favor or to compliment him, it's just a waste in verse 8, because this guy hates that you are in his home eating his food. In verse 9, sometimes fools say with their mouths that they are wise, but in his heart he despises wisdom. So it's a waste of time to share wisdom with a fool, even if he says that he's interested. In verses 10 through 12, here's a person who has evil motives and wants to move property lines, to steal land, even from orphans. And this can also apply metaphorically to moving the moral boundaries set by our ancestors. And we may say with our mouth, hey, we're just trying to be honest with the original context in Scripture and not impose our traditions on others, when in reality our hearts may be prideful, and we may think that our fathers had no idea what they're doing and we're so much smarter than they are, and so we can move the moral boundaries and change all of their traditions because we know better. And since all of this is about the motives of our hearts, he says in verse 12 to apply our hearts to discipline and our ears to words of knowledge. He wants us to change the motivations of our heart for the better through listening to God's wisdom, because God's wisdom gives us the ability not only to read our motives, but to change our motives for the better. In verses 13 and 14, how many kids will say with their mouth, I wasn't doing anything wrong, but in their hearts, they're lying to you and trying to manipulate you so that they can get out of punishment. Wisdom can tell the true heart motivation behind a child. Wisdom can tell the difference between a child making an honest mistake and a child being rebellious. And if they're rebellious, you got to discipline them to teach them there are consequences to having bad motives in our hearts and for being deceitful with our mouths. Now, it's helpful to clarify that this is about correction, not cruelty. When we read the word rod, we might picture some big, thick, heavy pole that when you hit a child with it, it leaves deep bruises or broken bones. But that's not the case at all. It would be a wooden stick of some kind, and enough force force would be applied to cause pain, but not to cause injury. And Jews in later writings even referred to the rod metaphorically as words of correction as well. And finally, in verses 15 and 16, he wants his son not only to have good motives in his heart, but for his mouth to match those motives. He wants him to speak the truth with his words that accurately reflect what he's really thinking in his heart. He doesn't want him to be manipulative like everyone else, saying one thing with their mouths while having completely different motives. And if he'll do this, it'll make his father so proud of him and so joyful. So the challenge for us is twofold. Number one, our mouths need to match our motivation. We can't tell people with our mouths that we are selfless and we're doing this favor for them out of the goodness of our heart, but then the real motivation is that we want something in return. We can't tell someone you're welcome to come to my house anytime, but then when they show up at our door, we're totally annoyed and we can't believe they're there and we just want them to leave. We can't tell someone we're in conflict with that everything is fine when in our hearts we're seething with rage against them. In those cases, we have to work on our motives and ask God to change and purify our hearts and remove every evil motive from us. And once we do that, our mouths need to match our motives. And then the second challenge is to learn to read the room. Sometimes people say things to cover their motives because they're just trying to be polite. So if it's 9 o'clock at night and you're the last person to leave someone's home, they might say it's okay if you stay, but they're just trying to be polite. And you need the wisdom to be able to see past their mouths to their actual motives, which is that they just don't want to offend you by asking you to leave, but they really would prefer if you left. Or if your boss invites you over for a meal, don't assume it must be because he loves you and he just wants to do something nice for you. Be on guard and realize, he doesn't really ask very many people over to his home. There must be something really important he wants to talk to me about, and maybe he's going to ask me to do something very difficult. So I need to be sober-minded and ready and not go into party mode so I can stay sharp. And this points to Christ, first of all, because his mouth always matched his motives. 1 Peter 2:22 says there was no deceit found in his mouth. And secondly, because his motives were always pure. He was never sneaky or underhanded or manipulative in his dealings with people. And finally, he was the master of reading a room and reading people's motives and not just their mouths. In fact, in Matthew 22, it says in verse 15, the Pharisees plotted together how they might trap him in what he said. And they sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians saying, Teacher, we know that you are truthful and teach the way of God in truth and defer to no one, for you are not partial to any. Tell us then, what do you think? Is it lawful to give a poll tax to Caesar or not? So notice they're flattering him and they're saying, we know you're an amazing teacher and everything that you say is true. But then in verse 18, it says, but Jesus perceived their malice and said, why are you testing me, you hypocrites? Jesus could see past people's mouths and straight to the motives of their hearts. So as we call on God for wisdom today, our prayer is, Father, help change the evil motives in my heart, and then align my mouth with my motives, and then grant me the discernment not to be fooled by the mouths of people around me, but to see through it to the motives of the heart, so I can be a wise son or daughter like Jesus that makes you proud and fills you with joy.